Where is the soul of John the Baptist? This is the JW Review. Hello everyone, welcome to the JW Review. My name is Mike Felker, and I'm making this video in response to a question that was asked of me. And the question was basically, where is the soul of John the Baptist? Okay, so if you have a question yourself related to this or something else, feel free to write in, and perhaps I can make a video just like this in answering your question. So the idea of the soul is not just something that would be of interest to someone engaging with Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that. It's really a question that should be of interest to any Christian. And there are a lot of perspectives out there, whether you're a Jehovah's Witness or an evangelical Christian or whatever. And that's really basically dualism or physicalism. So there's some things to distinguish within each one, but I'm just going to kind of be a little more broad here. So dualism is the idea that you have a separate component from your physical body that is still you. So you have a soul, an immaterial soul, that is separate from your body. So in other words, if your body died, or let's even say you got transferred to a new body of some kind, you still have an immaterial component to you that's going to be there. Now, if you're a physicalist, your body is your soul. That's all that you are. So that when you die, when your body dies, well, your soul dies too. There's just not a separate immaterial component to who you are. So those are the positions. So when we ask the question, where's the soul of John the Baptist, we're referring to the immaterial part or component of John the Baptist. Is that in heaven, or is it in Hades, or is it just in the ground, dead, along with John the Baptist's body? So for this video, we're going to actually be looking at the Watchtower perspective specifically. So even if you are a physicalist, you're probably going to disagree with the position that the Watchtower takes here. So this will be of more interest to those who are interested in Jehovah's Witness theology than otherwise. All right, so let's get into the topic. And we're going to start here with the Watchtower perspective, and it's from the Forever in Paradise Earth publication. And we're going to look in paragraph 6, and this is on page 121 through 123, and you can look this up for yourself in the Watchtower library at jw.org. It says, John who baptized Jesus was also a good man. Yet Jesus said, a person that is a lesser one in the kingdom of the heavens is greater than he is. And they quote here Matthew 11:11. So this really is not good reasoning because what they're trying to say is that if John the Baptist was in the kingdom of heaven, they couldn't say that the least one in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. But it's not talking about what the truth was in the first century. What Jesus is talking about is the person who is in the kingdom of heaven eschatologically, after Christ returns, after everyone is resurrected. That one is greater than John the Baptist as he is there in the first century. So it's comparing two different ages, the now age and the age to come. Now, I've written an entire article on this at michaeljfelker.com, and I'll try to put a link in the description to this video so you can see that article and get more details. But I don't think this at all proves that John the Baptist is not going to be in the kingdom of heaven, and I'll show you a scripture that explicitly says otherwise. Continuing on, this is so because John the Baptizer will not go to heaven. The text isn't saying that. Let's continue on. When Jesus was on earth, which was over 4,000 years after the rebellion of Adam and Eve, he said, no man has ascended into heaven, but he that descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And they quote here John 3:13. So John 3:13 is not talking about whether there's a disembodied soul that goes to heaven. That's not at all what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about ascending to heaven in the sense of resurrection, right? Of course, by Jesus' time, no one had undergone the resurrection. Okay, so once Jesus comes, then after that, we're going to see ones being resurrected into heaven. I believe that's when Christ returns. That's when we're going to see that, not when 1914 came. That didn't happen. So let's go on to paragraph 7. Therefore, according to Jesus' own words, no man had gone to heaven for all those 4,000 years of human history down until his day. David, Job, and John the Baptizer will receive a resurrection to life on earth. In fact, all faithful men and women who died before Jesus died had the hope of living again on earth, not in heaven. They will be resurrected to become some of the earthly subjects of God's kingdom. So none of these verses that the Watchtower cites here says anything about whether or not someone's soul will go to heaven. I agree in a sense that when everyone is resurrected, they're going to be resurrected to the new earth. Right? That is what the scriptures teach. Now let's contrast what the Watchtower says with what the Bible teaches. Because remember, they said that John the Baptist will not be in the kingdom of heaven. And the Watchtower thinks that's referring to heaven. So let's kind of take them at their word there. Matthew 8:11, which is just a couple of chapters before Matthew 11:11, says, this is Jesus talking, I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So these old covenant prophets are going to be in the kingdom of heaven, and they're going to be with Jesus. Jesus is going to be there, right? So that contradicts what the Watchtower says. At least it contradicts their understanding of what Matthew 11:11 is teaching. So if the kingdom of heaven is referring to going to heaven, then we have to say that John the Baptist is going to be there. Now let's look at some old covenant prophets and see if we can find any examples where we see that they are separated from their body. Because if they're separated from their body, that in essence proves that there is a soul. Because remember, under dualism, the soul is that separate immaterial component to oneself. So this is an example that I've raised a number of times on my podcast, but let's go there again. And there's a lot I could say about this. But in 1 Samuel 28:11, we see the account where Saul consults with a spirit medium to basically bring up Samuel, who had died. Right? So Samuel's body is dead, rotting in the ground, and he is actually summoned. Now, the Watchtower would argue that it was a demon who was summoned that's acting like they are Samuel. Now, the text does not say that. Okay? The text does not say that. So what you want to contrast when you're reading this whole account is contrast what the characters in the story or the historical account are saying. So we have the medium and we have Saul. They're saying things. They're making their interpretations on what happened. And then we have the inspired narrator who is describing what is happening. So what really matters is what the inspired narrator says is what happens, because the characters may not know what's happening, but the narrator or the inspired narrator does. So look at both of those together, because it could be that the characters are just flat out wrong in how they're interpreting what's happening. So let's read through a couple of verses in this account. Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" And he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." Now notice what the narrator says is happening here. Regardless of what the spirit medium thinks is happening, whether she's right or wrong in her interpretation, the narrator says that the woman saw Samuel. The inspired narrator is telling us what is actually happening, despite whether the woman understands what is happening, because the woman, well, let's read the account. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." The king said to her, "Do not be afraid, but what do you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I see a divine being coming out of the earth." So the woman doesn't really know exactly who she's seeing. For all she knows, it could be a demon, it could be a person. She doesn't know. She just sees someone coming up. And he said to her, "What is his form?" And she said, "An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe." So again, the woman doesn't know exactly who this is. It could be a demon. But the narrator is telling us what's happening. And Saul knew that it was Samuel. That's what the inspired narrator is telling us. Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and did homage. Then Samuel said to Saul, not a demon said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Samuel said, and Saul answered, "I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has departed from me and no longer answers me, either through prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have called you that you may make known to me what I should do." So again, we see what the characters are understanding what's happening, and then we see what the inspired narrator is telling us what is happening. So again, Samuel is dead in the ground, but he was summoned. It wasn't his body that came up, but it was his soul or his spirit, and he was able to communicate. So there's our example of showing what happens to old covenant prophets when they die. They are separated from their body. Now, this text is not teaching that we should be summoning spirits. This happened in spite of God's command to not summon spirits and do things like that. That's forbidden. But God allows this to take place in His sovereignty. Not that God is endorsing it, and that may be another video for another time. Now, do we know of any other examples where old covenant prophets that would also correlate to John the Baptist, that they're in a disembodied state? Well, yes, that is in the Mount of Transfiguration, and there's several accounts in the Gospels that bring this up, and I'm going to just look at the Lucan account. So Luke 9:28, some days after these sayings, he took along Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face became different, and his clothing became white and gleaming. And behold, two men were talking with him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who, appearing in glory, were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. So what we see here are Moses and Elijah, not in their physical bodies, but separated from their physical bodies, and they're communicating with Jesus. They're having a back and forth conversation. If it was merely a vision, Jesus wouldn't be communicating with a vision. It would be almost like me communicating with my TV screen, right? The people on the TV screen aren't communicating with me. There's not a back and forth. They can't hear me, right? I would just be watching. But that's not what this is. This is similar to Saul on the road to Damascus having a vision of Jesus, but he's really seeing Jesus. Jesus is actually there, and he's communicating with Jesus. Same thing here. Jesus is seeing Moses and Elijah, and he's communicating with them. So they must really be out there, but they're clearly in a disembodied state. Let's look at another example, and this is in Luke 16, and we'll read some of the account. Now there was a rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, joyously living in splendor every day. And a poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. So we see here what two types of people, where they go when they die. We see the faithful ones going to heaven when they die, and then we see the unfaithful ones going to Hades. Now, the point of this text, I don't think, is to portray a historical account that actually took place. That could have happened, but I don't think it's really necessary to substantiate the point here. What Jesus is doing is using something that is within the worldview of himself and the Jews, right, to prove a point. Okay, and that is that people go somewhere when they die. They don't have to wait for the final resurrection. Okay, so if it was the case that this whole idea of a soul, a disembodied state, something like that, if that was a pagan idea, a non-Christian, ungodly, unchristian pagan idea, Jesus wouldn't be using that as an illustration. That would be wrong, right? But what Jesus is doing here is using a concept, a theology that was familiar to his audience. And that is that people go to heaven when they die if they're faithful, and to Hades if they're unfaithful. A Jew would hear that and say, okay, well, no problem there. So what's your point? What's the point of this parable? And Jesus is giving us the point of this story. So I think Jesus is using a concept that is true to teach a parable. Okay, so does the Bible actually teach, though, a disembodied soul? So we saw examples of people, Old Covenant prophets, having a soul, and I think that would be maybe enough to prove the point. But where does the Bible actually teach it? Where's the teaching of this? Well, there's several places that we can go, but I don't want this video to be too long. I'm just answering someone's question. But let's look at one example from the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:6. Therefore, being always of good courage, and knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are of good courage, I say, and prefer rather to be absent from the body and to be home with the Lord. Therefore, we also have as our ambition, whether at home or absent, to be pleasing to Him. So what Paul is saying here is that he understands the concept of being absent from the body. Now, if physicalism is true, that your physical body is all that you are, there's not really any way to even conceive that you can be separated from the body or absent from the body. But the inspired Apostle Paul can conceive of that with no problem. He can say, I can be absent from my body and be at home with the Lord. So in other words, his body can die, it can go in the ground, but he can be at home with the Lord. So I think that very clearly teaches the idea of a soul, or being in a disembodied state, separated from your body. So let's wrap up this whole thing and get back to the original question. Where is the soul of John the Baptist? Well, I think the answer is most probably that he is in heaven with Christ. So we saw examples of Old Covenant prophets where they go when they die, and if we include John the Baptist with those Old Covenant prophets, I think there's good reason to believe that he's in the same place. But also, John the Baptist was a follower of Jesus Christ. And so I think the words of the Apostle Paul here can very well apply to John the Baptist. So if you found this question to be helpful, leave your comments. If you have additional questions, please leave them. I'll do my best to answer them. And if you have questions of your own that you would like answered in the form of a video like this, please feel free to write me in. Just go to michaeljfelker.com and you can easily contact me there. Or you can just leave a comment with your question. So if you found this to be helpful, please like this video. Please leave me a review in iTunes. It would be really, really helpful in getting the word out. If you never want to miss a video like this, please subscribe to my channel, or you can go to my website, michaeljfelker.com, and subscribe there. That way, any video, article, or whatever else is posted, you'll be notified when that comes out. So as always, thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time. For more information about Jehovah's Witnesses and other topics, please visit michaeljfelker.com. There you can also reach me directly to submit questions or comments to be covered on the JW Review. To subscribe to this podcast, please go to iTunes and search for the JW Review.